Welcome back, everyone. Jamie Sparks here, Kentucky Teachers in the Know. Excited to be joined with tonight's guest, Mr. Matt Robbins. Hello, Matt. How are you, sir?
Hey, Jamie. It's great to be with you this evening and look forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate your time and appreciate all that you're doing around Amendment 2. I was joking before we went on the air. We got back-to-back TV stars. Tom was with us last night, and you were able to join him on Monday on KET. But before we get started into Amendment 2 and the current events of the day, give our listeners just a little bit about your education background and some of those experiences.
Well, it's very unusual and uncharacteristic, Jamie. I began now over 29 years ago working for, at that time, Daviess County Public Schools. And my background is finance and accounting. And so there's opportunity there at Daviess County for me to get involved. And I thought it was an exciting opportunity, and proved to be that it was. Also had a little interim stay there with the Owensboro Public Schools, which was really outstanding, to be a part of their organization. But the most dominant number of years were at Daviess County, and I like to consider myself, I think I fit the category as a continuous learner. And, operations, all those things kept getting added to me as time went on. And sooner or later, had an opportunity to be the superintendent, and seized that opportunity, and was a tremendous experience that, I will cherish and remember the rest of my life. Some difficult days, as we all know, go along with that, but an outstanding experience and career in education. And through that process, I was in the business world, but through that process came to love how impressive the job and the role of our educators. And when I say that, I mean all of us that are contributing towards a common cause. And it felt great then, and still feels great now, to continuing trying to champion public education and what's best for it.
Absolutely. We appreciate all that you've done in your service, and thank you again. Thank you for joining us tonight to shed some light on what's really at stake here with Amendment 2. So you and I already acknowledged we've already been to the polls. So you did absentee, I did in-person absentee today. So we know that a lot of people across the Commonwealth are already voting. But for those that haven't, or are still looking for information, so as we frame up Amendment 2, you were on KET this week speaking about that. So give us just some of the highlights as far as from your educational experience as a superintendent, as a leader, as the network that you're engaged with. Why is it so important that we're focused on voting no on Amendment 2?
Well, and just to give a brief short history lesson here, I'm also president of the Council for Better Education, which most of our viewers probably won't know exists. But just to explain real quickly, we're the organization that was created, made up of superintendents that have brought 2 lawsuits, one that has been to the Kentucky Supreme Court, and House Bill 563, which was a voucher-like bill. It was labeled tax credits, but what we know is, everything under that umbrella may be called by a different name, and that's marketing. The other side's really good at marketing, and they changed the name, but it's really the same stuff. And then House Bill 9, most recently, that we've won in Franklin Circuit Court and waiting for appeal. That was a privatized charter type of a bill that we certainly opposed any type of privatization of public funds in Kentucky, because then we know what the outcome of this is. And I think people listening need to understand that these outcomes aren't projections. They're not what we think will happen. This comes at actual study of what's occurred in other states that have went down this path, particularly in a mighty way, with universal vouchers. And there are 6 things that are just common denominators that you see occur each and every time. And the first is that we know that vouchers wind up defunding our public schools. And it really is a logical thing. All these things tie into what's logic and common sense, because we know that state tax dollars, local tax dollars, in this case, state tax dollars, are scarce. And so every time there's an addition of another program, in this case, duplicity of programs with K through 12, and it's already provided for the public, what we know is that brings new cost in because there's another group that with scarce funds is trying to get their hands on that. So as that goes, we know that being perhaps not the favored child in this, that we're going to lose money. And in fact, there's a KSEP report, and that's the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. They've done a marvelous job of taking the state of Florida and then extrapolating that based upon Kentucky and our demographics. Certainly, we've got a fewer number of students, but they've taken that and extrapolated it to Kentucky in terms of a relevance of what that would mean per school district. So you can literally go to their website, look up your school district, and quickly find their report that says this is how much money would be lost, these are how many teacher positions that would be lost, and so forth. And then when you juxtapose that whole idea that schools would be defunded, which again, our research and evidence all supports that. Then you couple that with, the idea that 90% or over 90% of our students, our children in Kentucky, are educated where? And, in our public schools. And so we're already underfunded in a mighty way. We asked the legislature for about $800 more per student this past session, just based on inflation of where we once were and where we are now. And so, we're already in not a good place or position with what we pay teachers, with some of the programs that financially we're able to afford for our kids. And now you talk about another whole new program that comes along. So that's the first piece. And the second piece that really causes me issues, I think, as a taxpayer, as well as public education, but I really kind of put my taxpayer hat on, is the fact that most students that receive this new government aid via vouchers are kids that were already enrolled in the private school. So basically, if you just take that alone and you think about, well, we're now paying for students and the cost of education that we were once not provided. So there's that expense. And it's breaking some of the states that have gone this route. Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, North Carolina are all states that have seen, really budget busters by introducing this program. But then if you just look at that on the surface, it's really not a conservative measure at all, because you're introducing a very high cost to the budget. And if you're already paying the private school tuition that was paid 100% by the parent just a year ago, well, that sure sounds like an entitlement program. And that's the way I look at it from a conservative lens, is this is not, a conservative policy. And, furthermore, one of the other common denominators we see is this starts to expand. It does encourage the proliferation of new private schools to open up. Not all bad. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But when you look at the teacher shortage, Jamie, that we have now, and say now all of a sudden we're going to onboard all these teaching positions, where are they going to come from? Honestly. And then some of the people that may be in front of children gets to my next point, which means it actually devastates learning for the 25% or so of students that go in and out of what I call mom and pop private school to maybe back to their public school, to just kind of a yo-yo that occurs with that. Another, huge problem I have with this is the fact that it's sole and parent choice. Okay. Which, based on the face of that, I don't think anybody has a real problem. We have that today. We have private schools that are in existence that parents choose to send their children to for a number of reasons. And all of them are, the parent's decision. I fully respect that. We have homeschools. We're one of only 3 states in America that allows open enrollment among our public schools. There's only 3 of us, but yet we're catchphrased as we're only 2 states that don't have any choice or funded choice that's available. And I think that's absolutely false. But then when I kind of go back and merge that with the idea that public money has to go towards schools that provide all students an education. And what we know is parent choice then quickly becomes the school's choice, because the school has the ultimate choice as to whether they accept, reject, or even remove a student, after they've accepted them. And I just think on that layer alone, that's why our framers, who were probably the least non-political people, as compared to today, I'm not saying they weren't political, because I think they were, but when you compare that to today's highly generated political environment, like, they were much more understanding of the ramifications, unintended consequences of doing such what I call a radical thing here, and a radical certainly for the state of Kentucky. The last thing I just have to mention is, about Kentucky. Kentucky is a very rural state, particularly as compared to many other states. We're also a very high poverty state. We're unfortunately, it's not one of the best metrics that we see ourselves, but we're ranking anywhere between 45 to 50 in terms of poverty and what the median household income is in our state. So if you think about the cost of private education, and I hand a kid a voucher in rural Bourbon County, McLean County, Letcher County, I mean, I could just go on across the board. I may as well given them a voucher to a school in Los Angeles, because the opportunity for that child to access a private school, which doesn't exist in 75 of our 120 counties, and then say, well, you got to find a way to get there. That's number one. And then number two, you got to get them to accept you, and you're going to have a balanced due bill here, because if the tuition's $8,000, the voucher's $5,000, you do the math, that's $3,000 in our poor families. I mean, anybody that's in the Family Resource Center and connected to that arm, which I always call the heart of any school, and you figure out we're paying for shoes, coats, dental care, utility. I mean, it's just, it could not be a more mismatched concept or idea for the predominance of the state. And that gets me really to my last point then, is where does this money wind up going? As they always say, follow the money. Well, most of the private schools, in fact, 80% of our private schools are located in 8 zip codes, a grand total of 8 zip codes. Okay. So if you don't have an opportunity, guess what? That money's going to become much more centralized to Lexington, Louisville, and Northern Kentucky. Not that they can't use it, but we certainly wouldn't want that to be at the expense of all of our 75 rural counties and others that fit that description.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, we were talking this morning in a group chat with the administrators. Erin Williams gives you a shout out, by the way. She just joined as an administrator and said she was in your district a number of years ago. But as we were talking this morning and just chatting, we literally have shut down the traffic for the next 2 weeks so that we can laser focus in on this Amendment 2 issue. And part of the reason I brought that back to the group, as far as like kind of narrowing down the conversation to this for this 2-week period, is I got tired of going to the mailbox every day and opening up 3 or 4 different types of vote yes mailers. And so it's very clear the money interest at stake in this. And that's sort of what you were kind of leading. And when we look at what's happened in other states, this is a for-profit model. They can frame it up around it's for kids, it's for this. But the reality is this has not been successful in the other states that went down this. It's a business model. It's not about kids. And so I want to get your comments on this, because I think that's where I really, to everybody in Kentucky Teachers in the know, the 30,000 plus members that we have that have been engaged, this group became this group because of Matt Bevin. When he used to make fun of us and name call and do all the silly things he would do, teachers got fired up. And when teachers were fired up, things happened in Frankfort and we protected our interests. But in recent years, we haven't protected those interests as well. We haven't done the advocacy. We assume, I think that's just the nature of teachers, right? We don't necessarily want to be engaged in these conversations. We just want to just take care of kids. But the reality is,
Right.
if we fail to get engaged, things are going to happen. And you and Tom alluded to this last night. The Council for Better Education has literally taken the legislature to task on some of the things they've passed. And thankfully, the court system has sided with us in keeping public education protected. But if this thing goes, there's like this is Pandora's box that opens, right? As far as, so can you speak to that a little bit, over the emphasis of what teachers can do over these next 2 weeks to really get the message out in communities, because we're being inundated with so much misinformation. We do have some platforms and options. So can you speak to the importance of this issue from that perspective?
Glad to. And I always start with, let's start about the amendment itself. And I'm not going to read it all for the essence of time here, but, I just spoke about these first few words, and to give parents choices. Okay. And I'll just say at the least end of that, based on what I just said a few minutes ago about the students who really receive vouchers, which is really in the early years as much as 90%, the average tends to settle out about 75% of students that get vouchers were already private school students to start with. And a lot of reasons for that I won't go into, but just know that there is research and evidence, that tells us that. That's a fallacy just on the flat reading as we begin to talk about this. And so if I'm a person looking to trust or looking for credibility, we're starting off in a bad spot here, just from what I've read and what I've been able to inform you about. And then it says outside the system of common public schools. And we get the name common because a lot of the goods and services that were provided by the government, and that are still today, such as our police, our fire, emergency services, parks, on and on, library, all those were considered to be the common services provided with the sharing of the tax dollars from the taxpayers to provide to the public for the public's good. So I think that's the significant thing there, is outside the system, which tells us exactly what the intent is. And I know we've all heard it said, and we've seen it on, there's no policy in Amendment 2. Well, there's some shred of truth to that, but underneath all of that is significant truth in the fact that 2 voucher bills have already been passed by this legislature, declared unconstitutional, as you mentioned, Jamie. Therefore, that's the reason why we have this amendment to change our Constitution so it allows us to fund schools outside, which are our common schools. And then it goes down to naming 7 sections of the Constitution that would be set aside. And I think just a few things contextual there. Private schools have been around for a long, long time. In fact, private schools existed long before public education existed, for the reason of generally the wealthy, the property owners, wanted to make sure that as they would pass on, their estates, their farms, etc., that they were passing it on to their children who would receive an education. Then it was understood that as America began to grow, that we had to educate our populace, and public schools were created. But this sets aside 7 pillars of our Constitution, which is quite significant. Okay, it's not 1 or 2 or 3, but 7 of those that says, hey, what they wrote as framers about good government and civics and how we should be organized, and also safeguards that we should have in place. Let's just put these aside so we can let this group of Frankfurt politicians make a choice about education for this point in time and for all eternity, for practical purposes of our conversation here. And I look at that and I think pardon my straightforwardness about this, the audacity, frankly, that we're so much wiser. We know so much more. than the people who wrote it about an issue that existed then. Okay, so this isn't new. It existed at the same time this was being written, to say those things can just be set aside so we can go on about our purpose, and then, write a blank check on the public tax dollars to fit an agenda by what they're after. So I have immense issues with that. Now, what can teachers continue to do? One of the things we need to do is engage. And I think you mentioned that is, if we don't engage now, this policy, the ramifications of real children, of real schools in our communities, is catastrophic in terms of what it can mean. So sitting on the sidelines is, in my opinion, a horrific strategy, and one that doesn't fit the times by which we find ourselves, based upon the size of this thing. So what I say to them is continue to educate. The more people learn about the things we've talked about today, guess what? They wind up being convinced exactly what we're saying, that this is terrible policy. Why would we do this? Why are we even voting on this to start with? Because of all the ills that are here. And I'm going to say this, Jamie, because I think it bears mentioning. I've been involved in this for about a 7-year period. Okay, so the fact that we're here comes along a road of a pathway with the idea that this is where we're going to wind up landing. So that's not by accident. And several of us have been involved, not just in Kentucky, but making sure we're looking at the other states. And we always want to do our best for children, no matter what that is. That's our ultimate goal for everybody that's listening to this broadcast, is we want to do our very best for children. If this worked, I'd be a big advocate by it. I just want to say that. Okay. Yeah. If this worked and was great for children and was a rising tide that lifted all boats and got all of our children to proficiency, like we all want to occur, I would raise my hand and I'll say I'll be the first to support this. Why? Because it would make sense. It's just logic. And that's what we're trying to utilize here. So I'd just say to teachers, keep doing what you're doing. Educate your friends, your neighbors, be engaged on the topic, because every time we find out we get a chance to do that, we win people over because they understand the reality of what this is and what it is not.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt, very much. This whole conversation was streamed live into our group, but everything that we're doing the next 2 weeks, we've been more intentional about putting out there on our public page as well for Kentucky Teachers in the Know. We appreciate all the messages from the superintendents and KSBA and Council for Better Ed. It's a united front of everybody that's represented in public ed, and we just need to make sure that those teachers in the trenches and communities, you're talking to your neighbors, you're talking to your friends, you're talking to your family. My son and I literally drove to the absentee ballot today, and he had a lot of misinformation. He's like, Dad, explain this to me. What's going on with this? So, the message is really, and he said, man, it's frustrating. They make this sound really good. And, a few-minute conversation, and he totally understood what was going on in that bigger picture. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for shining some light on the bigger issue. And we appreciate it. We know there's some bus stops or around the tour states going on as well. So we've shared that into the group. So we hope people will get engaged locally and continue to get the word out. Any closing thoughts as we say goodbye?
Hey, thank you for the work that you do. And to all of our teachers, thank you for the work that you do each and every day with our children, because you're the heroes. And I know sometimes you may not feel that way, but I want you to know that for those of us who know what goes on, you're the incredible heroes that we have across this Commonwealth. And thank you for what you do for us.
Awesome. Good closing words. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and look for announcements. We got some other special guests that will be joining us over the next 12 days or so. So be on the lookout for those messages coming very soon.